So it gives us two files here. We have a demo Android app and a generated utils. So the generated utils is just our keys. This is how it loads any predefined data that you may have exported with your project. Since we didn't have any, we don't have any of those files. So this utility is there, but not really used. Then we have our demo Android app. This is the meat of everything. If you look, it looks just like a Selenium project or a TestNG or unit test project with Selenium. So we have to set up our driver, we execute, we get our driver, we tear down. Once we're finished, we provide the parameters, which is where that utility file comes in. And then we get the browser capabilities. So they have a get capabilities method. So we can actually, if this was a browser, we would do our browser configuration there. Since this is Android, we do the same thing. We set up the different emulators thing. So we say, oh, our platform is Android. What is our emulator? Since we're not really doing a browser, we leave the browser name blank. But here we have to actually set the package name and activities. This looks very similar if you go back to any of the Selenium classes I've talked about for testing. This looks just like a TestNG project, but it's appy. So we have our display name, demo Android, setup. So here's our Android key. It's registered to me. We do our execute. So we pass in the provided parameters. We get our results. So we set that start the results as false, and they get defined as true at the end. So we have our pause times. We have driver, ready app, and so on. Now I will try to run this. I had some issues with this before because I don't quite have Appium configured correctly on my machine yet, but we will give this a whirl. So we'll try to run this as a unit test. It's still trying to load. Only recently was I able to get Android running on my Mac. I have the new M1 Mac, so they just came out with the latest API build, so we can actually run the emulators now on this device. And the problem I'm running into now is Appium isn't quite configured right on my device to actually interact from code to the emulators. So I still have to work on that. But that's it. So here's your code. You can make changes to this. You can then load this to any continuous integration project you want, like Jenkins, Bamboo, and run your emulators, and you should be good to go. Do we have any questions?
Hey there, Michael. I was just a little curious on, you probably covered this and I just missed it in the meeting, or missed the meeting. You've Selenium versus TestNG versus TestProject. I'm sure they just have their strengths and weaknesses. Which one do you prefer? Maybe they're covering different use cases for you.
Okay, so you're looking for the differences between TestProject, TestNG, Selenium, and the Selenium ID, the different flavors for testing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so first of all, TestProject is definitely more heavily geared towards like manual UI emulator driven testing. That is pretty much what TestProject is. You go in there, you set up your tests, then you can kick off your tests and run them all through their emulators, through their containers. With that being said, they've added the coding piece so you can now run offline and export everything. So now you have that more continuous integration type model that you could do with your types of testing. With Appium, it's pretty neat. Now, if you export their web tests, they actually export the web tests using JUnit and Selenium WebDriver. So you really can't get away from Selenium WebDriver if you're trying to run things from code. However, with that being said, the Selenium IDE tool, to me, is inferior to what TestProject provides. Because TestProject actually gives you that self-healing, that AI feature. So that is huge when it comes from a testing perspective when you're trying to record scripts. Because your apps are changing. A lot of times when you're testing stuff, it's in flux. It's still being developed. So what you run into is, your test works today. When they do a deploy tomorrow, it breaks. So now you have to go in and you have to troubleshoot, find the new ID, find the new button, whatever. Well, with Selenium ID, you're going to have to go do all that manually. You're going to have to walk through the steps, see where it fails, fix it by either re-recording it or fixing the IDs. With TestProject, you just run the test. If it identifies something changes, it will give you that little pop-up and give you the option to select a new way of looking it up, like new XPath, new ID, new button, new component. And then you save your test and you're done. So that from the record and playback perspective, TestProject is hands down the best tool I've seen yet. From a continuous integration option, if you're doing mobile testing, when you export your code, everything they do, they export to JUnit, which is fine, except JUnit is a little limited on some of the things that you can do as far as its primary role is unit testing. Whereas TestNG allows you to do a lot of your like regression testing, your integration testing. Like you can actually start doing the different layers of testing from TestNG. You just have to set it up and configure it. So TestNG is more robust as far as a testing framework from a coding perspective. So anything you export from TestProject to code, I would recommend once you get it working as JUnit, port it into TestNG and then set it up for more continuous integration, more robust testing, regression testing, and then deploy it to something like Jenkins or Bamboo. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And actually added some nuance to it. I was thinking to myself, I'm not sure if you can hear me, was thinking to myself around the was it click and record and such, but you added the nuance that Selenium is going to allow you to then take that to code and do the continuous integration and delivery. So really nice, really nice. Appreciate the answer.
Yeah, and definitely. And that's kind of what I've learned in the last 7-8 years of doing this with testing. I mean, I've looked at almost every tool out there. There's still a handful I'm not overly familiar with. Like I have messed around with Cucumber, and while it's useful, I think it is completely bloated with the with what it is required to do all the setup and your struts and stubs that you have to do to actually get to the point where you write your tests. Where the Selenium framework that I've been kind of showing that I've kind of built up over time eliminates most of that. That's what that test generator tool is that I have. But with that said, there's other things out there like Protractor. You got other unit tests and plugins now for Visual Code. So there are other things out there, but still a lot of them are in their infancy. So be careful with that. It's like TestProject. When I first looked at it when it was version 1, it was interesting. I liked the concept and I liked the ideas, but at its time, it was very inferior to what it is today. What it is today, if you take TestProject and you take I want to say it's Catalan, which is the test GUI tool, open source tool you can download and record your tests that I've shown in the past. Not Catalan, which is, I get these confused because they're so closely named. Not the Google language, but the test tool. It's either Catalan or Catalan. And that is like an Eclipse type tool that is record playback. It gives you a little bit more code. You can kind of structure it a little bit more there and build out your test cases and run kind of a little bit more along the lines of like what SOAP UI did, but from more of a record playback kind of perspective. So they actually embed what it looks like, the Selenium IDE, within their test tool. Well, that's all fun and games and all great. It still requires a lot of user interaction with the interface to basically build your tests, to run your tests, to manage your tests. Where if you export it to a good test framework in code, it's very quickly, if you separate those layers, if you do it right, like I've shown, where if you separate all your test logic to a test portion of your framework and all the basically the interfacing with the application for testing to the other part of the framework, now the two can work in parallel. So you can go tweak the framework to work with the application as changes happen without impacting the tests. And you can continue to write tests without needing to worry about the framework. You just use the framework, the integration points as you need them. So it's kind of a best of both worlds, but it depends on your environment. If you're dealing with a small, like a very small mobile app or very small web app, you don't need to go to that extreme. Just use a record playback tool, do a few things, get up and running, and be done. But if you have a larger test suite, with maybe like 10, 15, 20 customers, you have maybe 5, 6, 7 integration points within your application, you may have data sets that you need to test, then yes, definitely go from the simpler testing to a more advanced framework like TestNG, Selenium, or whatever flavor you need for your testing.
Good stuff. Appreciate that.
Good question. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, hearing none. I'd like to thank everyone for their time today. If you'd like to discuss any of these topics further, you can reach us on info@developerner.com. We also have a contact us page on developerner.com. You can find our videos on YouTube, just Google Developer. And we also have our videos on Vimeo at vimeo.com/developer. We also have podcasts on most podcast applications like Spotify, iPod on Mac. Just check us out. Search for Developer. Our goal is making every developer better. Have a great day.